Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Nonprofits again for our second episode this week. Tonight is Wednesday, February 12th, and we had a fun recording the other day on Monday. But this topic that we're going to talk about is a little bit more somber, a little bit more serious. And so I'm just going to get right into it with a quote that I think sums up the entire situation that's happening in Bangladesh. And so we are going to discuss an article tonight called They Marry Off Girls Because They Are a Burden: The Battle to Save Bangladesh's Child Brides, from Telegraph by Tom Parry on January 20th, 2025. In order to introduce this article, I want to actually read kind of a long quote from another article from 2018, also from the Telegraph. And this is on child marriage and sex trafficking in Bangladesh by Corinne Redfern. It's been 5 years since Rupa was trafficked into the brothel. Married at 11 years old to a man in his 30s who she'd never met. She spent her wedding day playing hide and seek with her cousins in the mud. I ripped off pieces of my sari to make little wedding dresses for my dolls, she remembers. When my husband raped me that night, I didn't understand what was happening. I only felt pain. She fell pregnant shortly after, but when her husband was killed in an accident at work, her family refused to take her back. They said they couldn't afford to look after me or my son. I wasn't a virgin anymore, so no man would marry me. Hungry and alone, the then 13-year-old took a train to Dhaka in the hopes of finding work in a garment factory. A woman saw me crying at the station and said she had a friend who was looking for a maid, Rupa says. I followed her home, but she sold me here instead. And of course, this excerpt was taken in an interview with this young girl at a brothel in Bangladesh. And, you know, I just want to say that, like many poor and orthodox religious countries, this is common, unfortunately. And young girls, particularly women in general, are devalued. We see it in Christianity. There's evidence for it throughout the Bible. There's evidence for it culturally, whether you look at Mormons or just basic texts stating that women can't, be in the church or can't be vocal in church. They can't teach men. They can't lead and in many cases work. And so we see that across the world, but particularly in Bangladesh, they are incredibly poor. A 91% Muslim country, and they're just living with a lot of turmoil. And of course, the females, the younger they get, are the ones that bear the brunt of such atrocity. And so, with that being said, I want to go to Helen, and Helen, I want to ask you, what are the key factors that lead to child marriage, particularly with girls?
So, guess what? Everybody's misogyny. But also as well, one thing about this article that I appreciate that they did talk about the education that they're trying to provide to these girls and the hopes that they have for a better future, because these are young children. These are like if you're a parent, imagine your 12-year-old daughter having to choose between having dreams of a future versus being forced into a marriage. And there was also mention in the article about parents that didn't want their children to be sold into these child marriages, and they had hopes for their own children. And there were programs that were brought in for these kids to get educations. But the thing is, though, is that these incidents in Bangladesh are rare. This is not the norm. The norm is that these girls are going to be sold into marriage. And because it's not so much, it's a burden. I think there's some genuinely good parents there, but because of lack of economic opportunity, lack of education, and sort of the religious upbringing that, girls and women are second-class citizens, even if they have the best intentions, they're kind of forced into these situations. There have been situations like in Romania where girls were sold into sexual slavery, not because the parents really wanted them to be sold into sexual slavery. It was because they were dirt poor and had no other option. So these are the, and it sounds cruel, and it is, it's cruel for parents to have to make these decisions, but when push comes to shove and you're so desperate that you have to make these really terrible, horrible decisions, and I'm not excusing this, keep this in mind, but I can understand why it happens. And I just want to point out, I'll talk about this later, about the child brides that happen here. So that's another conversation we can have. So I'm not passing the buck. I'm just saying that this is a very, not only religious problem, but this seems to be also a problem of lack of education, lack of economic opportunity as well, not just religion.
And it's funny the way that those feed off of each other. I mean, if you look in our country, lack of education and poor surroundings and are also highly religious. It seems to be a formula that can't be broken. I would disagree with you, but not necessarily with you. I would just say that there is certainly a cultural difference, because I would never sell one of my children, no matter how bad things got. Right. I have a daughter. I would never do that. I would die before that happened. I would starve to death before that happened. These folks don't. And it's probably due to the poor education, but also the kind of infiltration of religion where that education doesn't exist, and thus victimizing generation after generation. So, I would have to argue with anybody who thought that was a good alternative. Why that they might think that. Anyway, I digress a little bit. AJ, I want to go to you. You brought up a really good point leading up to this article, and that is, that the article largely focuses on young girls, but what are we not getting? There's a larger point here.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to take away from the tragedy that these young girls are going through, right? But the article does point out something that's usually not talked about, and that's the fact that boys are also being married off. When we think of child brides, we always think, this is an adult man that is already settled, that is like buying a little child girl to do whatever he wants with her. But in the cases of places like Bangladesh, it's a little bit different, because everybody is in the same poverty level. So the boys and the girls are at the same poverty level. And it seems that the article explained that the boys have to leave school early to help families to cover the cost of rebuilding after natural disasters. They have a lot of cyclones in the area, so there is a lot of flooding. The island is at a very, very close to the sea level, so it floods extremely easy. They lose their homes, seasonally. So the children have to go to work and they have to leave school. That's one of the reasons that they stop going and getting their education. Obviously this happens before they turn of age, they turn 18. So you have all of these young boys that left school early that are being married to girls that are just slightly a little bit younger. So it can be like a 12, 13-year-old girl marrying off to like a 14 or 15-year-old boy. So it's not like an extreme age difference, but it's still not right. It's
sure.
You have children being married off to children.
Yeah,
that's what you have here.
I do. I see that. I see that point. And it's important to recognize that all children are in danger here. And it is due to this, in my opinion. It's due to this cycle of kind of never-ending poverty, never-ending opportunity, and it's just, kind of perpetual. Rob, I want to go to you. Is there anything that could be done to fix this?
So the article starts by talking a lot about child marriage, and then it pivots a lot into the education and how they're trying to help, especially the girls. I think predominantly the girls become educated, which I think is the cool part, because there's really only a couple ways that this can solve out, right? Like there are other organizations, perhaps even countries or just whatever else, that could come in and change it, but that's not a great solution. But really, that through the means of education, what I like about it is like, teach the girls that they have value, teach the girls that they can continue to accrue value through skills and education, whatever else they might be interested in. And then the article has quotes from couple of them that like they want to grow up and be a doctor and stuff like that. So like leave, go. Like that might be hard, but if you think of this population, and this is going to sound cruel, if you think of the population more as just like an organism, over time, it should be able to have individuals and then the organism as a whole evolve into, we're going to go out and we're going to do stuff. And by teaching the girls that they themselves have value, each generation of educated child should be able to do a little bit better than the previous one. So then by doing that, they can basically allow them to get pissed off and then not be happy with the status quo.
Yeah, you know, I really thought it was a great idea, and I think Helen brought this up before, or at least started going down that road, but that there were programs in place that actually paid families to have their kids stay in school because they lose their kids due to poverty, whether it's their daughters being married off. And like we listed in the intro, you know, they do end up in either being abused or even married to much older men, even though the other boys are being married out. The girls are, I think, the ones that are susceptible to sexual abuse. And that's really what the worst case scenario, I think, is for these children. But yeah, paying parents to keep them in school and paying parents to have their kids, you know, learn and make something of themselves instead of having to get rid of them. I want to read some statistics that I have here. And so I'm going to speak to a typo. You guys have seen my notes. I wrote that 16% of families are practicing child marriage. It's actually 60. It's 60. I wrote that backwards, but it's 60% are also living in rural areas. So I thought that was interesting that the rural and the number of child marriages are kind of coinciding. 56% of girls are married before completing high school. And in one survey, 375 sex workers across 4 brothels, 47% were child brides trafficked into prostitution against their will. It's so horrible, but these are numbers that we need to kind of push out there and make sure everybody understands. Helen, you had some statistics of your own and some numbers, some data that you wanted to share. And I found that they were really interesting. So if you will, please enlighten us.
So because I want people to understand that this doesn't happen in just like a microcosm. Like this is something that's happening throughout the world. And that though we're talking about what's happening in Bangladesh, this happens here. There's 37 states that still do this practice, which is mind-boggling when you think about it. So I pulled up some statistics by the Koski-Hyman study. This was a study that was done in the mid 2010s, and basically these are the averages about 10 years ago. But it's just a little bit of a, like, you know, something to kind of think about. For example, in Texas from 2014, almost 40,000 children were married. In Florida, 16,400 children, some as young as 13 years old, were married from 2000 to 2017, which is the second highest incidence of child marriage after Texas. In Alabama, there were over 8,600 child marriages from 2000 to 2015, the fourth highest amount of any state. However, child marriage in Alabama showed a large decline in that time. In 2000s, almost 1,200 children are married, but dropped to 190 by 2014. In Virginia, between 2004 and 2013, nearly 4,500 children were married, according to Tara Justice Center. In Ohio, from 2000 to 2015, there were 4,440 girls married age 17 and younger, including 43 age 15 and under. In New York, more than 3,800 children were married between 2000 and 2010. And Koski also found that only 20% of married children were living with their spouses. The majority rest were still living with their parents. So the parents, like, they're still living at home, those children, but the parents are still, agreeing for them to enter these marriages. And most of this comes from religious families that are marrying their children, that are allowing their children to be married. This is not happening in communities where kids get access to economic growth.
Yeah.
And they also have the ability to have, have that mobility upwards. Yeah. Now, we can think of the Mormon religion. We can think of other religions that are kind of okay with your children being kind of married off. I think it's gross, but this comes from even if you're brought up religious, like I was brought up religious, my parents would never think that I should get married at 14 years old.
Okay.
They were like, you need to grow up, you need to go to school, you need to get an education. So this is not just a symptom of religion, it's also the societal factors that goes around it.
Yeah. And I think that's what
people being taught.
Yeah, right. And that's what I was kind of alluding to, this perfect storm of poverty and of a lack of education where religion is able to kind of sink its hooks in and provide something. But then, it ends up giving you the worst case scenarios. And speaking of scenarios, AJ, you had some solutions highlighted coming into tonight's recording. And I just wanted to kind of talk to you about that and some of the laws that have been passed in Bangladesh to try and protect kids.
Yeah, I think Rob had a comment, maybe, possibly.
Rob, were you trying to jump in?
Something.
I'm so bad at my job. Please, Rob.
We don't jump in on the show.
I don't try to jump in before you, AG, every time. That's not on purpose. I was going to say between Jimmy and Helen, correlation, not causation, but boy, howdy, isn't it convenient that every single study shows that the poorer you are and the less educated you are, therefore the more religious you are. Yeah. And then when it comes to this, yes, not all religious people marry off their daughters, because let's face it, we're talking about the daughters. Not every religious person marries off their daughters. We know this to be true because we have at least one person, but also most people don't do that in America, but it still does occur. So I think it's worse than that, right? Because it's not just you have to be poor and uneducated to be likely to be religious, and then you need to have the very bad religion that makes you feel that women are literal property, that thus this is a transaction. That's the problem, is it's the transactional component to it, really.
And I think the state of Bangladesh realizes that the transaction is the solution that people are looking for. And since AJ graciously yielded her time to the man on my screen, bottom right, but also to my left, if you're watching us now, I want to go back to AJ and say, hey, AJ, what is the Bangladeshi authority doing?
So there it seems to be like a huge focus on education. Wait, you're over here. You're on this side, Rob.
Go on.
Anyway, it seems like education is the key here, because with all the work that they have done, the enrollment rates have gone way up. I think I say about 90% enrollment rate. So it's a huge difference from the 1980s when it was like around 40%. So their work is working, and it seems that the solution is focusing on keeping them in school. One of the things that you mentioned earlier was that they're paying families, like basically they give them a little bit of money to make sure that they keep their kids in school. And as I also mentioned, the reason that they were dropping out of school was because they are having to go to work to cover for the cost, after a natural disaster, rebuilding homes and all of that. So if they have that extra money from these organizations, then they're going to be able to cover that recovery effort without having to take their kids out of school. So that's an excellent solution right there. Another thing they're doing is they build out of these really, really small schools. They're like a one classroom type of schools, but they're all over. They have about 64,000 schools and 1.8 million students. So this means that the kids can walk to school. They don't need to have any type of transportation. So access to the school is so important, because if they have to drive or walk a whole hour, then they're not gonna go there, right? When I was a kid growing up, I had to walk like about 45 minutes to an hour to the only school that we had around. We did it every day. If it was raining, then we couldn't make it. But so having these schools within like 10 minutes to where they can just go back and forth, excellent. Keeping them motivated, like giving them things to look forward to. There were some of the kids in the article that said they wanted to be teacher, another one wanted to be a doctor, another one wanted to be a soldier. So like giving these kids dreams and something to be like, hey, I can work toward that, I can be that, I can do better than just being. I'm not saying that it's wrong to be a farmer, but like in their poverty stricken areas, being a farmer, it does not bring any type of money that is going to take them anywhere.
Especially when 60% of your economy or 60% of your populace is agricultural. You're competing every day, to try and make a living. Especially if you consider all of the imports that the country can take from agriculture happening around the world. There's you pretty much can only sustain yourself. I did a little bit of research on dowries. I was interested in seeing how the dowry affected Bangladesh, because I know that people would, when you marry off your daughter, you collect the dowry from the groom's husband. The groom's family.
The bride's.
The bride's family collects a dowry, right? A cash payment or maybe some kind of economic bump in the form of maybe livestock or who knows. But that has been outlawed in Bangladesh. And I wanted to see what you guys thought about that and what you think the impacts of that might be. Rob, go ahead.
Well, really quick, I think you have that backwards. It's the wife brings the dowry to the husband.
Was it?
No.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yes, because the wife doesn't have value. Remember.
Wife?
So your
Interesting.
money or property or money brought by a bride to the husband, because you are giving them support for taking your woman, and the woman does not have value.
Okay.
Remember?
The worthless. Okay, I think you're right. Okay. I think you might be right.
The dowry is not allowed. But it's not practiced in Bangladesh as mandatory obligation of society. I thought that it was different in Bangladesh.
That could be very true, and I could just be messing everything up.
Okay, so I will tell you this though. All right, so I will admit wrongdoing, so that I'm not. I don't want to just sit here and start researching, because I may very well have gotten that backwards. But so poverty-stricken areas. Does it even make a difference to eliminate that?
I think it's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's got the money to pay it anyway, right? So really, the government taking this approach to say, hey, dowries will not be allowed. Well, it doesn't really do anything for the children, because it only really would affect the middle class, who they're not struggling to make or receive payment anyway, and so the problem stays in the impoverished area. Anyway, I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to kind of get your guys' take, I guess, as we wrap up the show, about what will work and what will not work in preventing or reversing this kind of cultural mindset. So I'm going to go down the line. I'm going to go. I'm going to go Helen, Rob, AJ. So Helen, what do you think? I mean, where do we go from here in Bangladesh?
Well, I'm hoping, because as AJ's pointed out about the more children getting access to education, that it's going to be slow. It always is. There's not going to be tomorrow we're going to find out that all the girls have equal opportunity, and they're all going to be well educated and blah blah, because that's a pipe dream. But slow incremental changes over time. The fact that Bangladesh has allowed a dowry, even though it's still practiced illegally in certain areas of Bangladesh, that it's still going to happen. But because you can change the law, but it takes longer to change mine. But I'm hoping the more exposure these children have to education is the more that they have dreams, that down the line we're going to see child brides. It might not completely go away, but the statistics will go down as these kids get older and they were afforded these opportunities and they become parents, that they're going to want the same thing for their children. That's what I hope for. It's going to be slow. It's going to be hard, but that's the type of things that we can look forward to when like we're looking at the story in the microcosm that it is now, that down the line that there'll be change.
Yeah. Hence the organism, I think, representation that Rob was talking about before. So Rob, go ahead. What do we do now? Where does Bangladesh go?
I think they just keep doing this, to be honest. Like, there's a reason why we do free lunches in America, and why we should keep doing free lunches in America. So it's just useful for parents, for schools to offer a lunch or a stipend, because now you're being rewarded for the education. So in the short term, it's good to reward just getting them into the education, because the education is going to allow long-term the children to have the audacity to have ambition, and then they will become unrestful, which is what I want.
Yeah, AJ.
Yeah, I think that the dowry thing is pretty useless, really. I mean, it's not like anybody's out there, publicizing that they're gonna marry their child and that they're, giving a dowry with the child. Like, it's just, they can just relabel it as a gift and still do it. So I think focusing on the education aspect is what's working and what should continue to be done.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they're making small gains, and they should probably just keep working in that direction. I hope that the government upholds this, and we just find a way out of this. By the way, Rob, you were correct. So I misread that. But yeah, the dowry is of course a payment from the bride's family to the groom's. And I am glad that you brought up free lunches in America, because this Saturday, folks, don't forget to tune in to the Nonprofits, same time, same place. We are going to be talking about a congressman who thinks that school-age kids should get a job if they want to eat at school. In any case, if you want to hear more about some of this crazy stuff that we're seeing out in the world at the hands of religion, keep tuning into the Nonprofits and click the link below.